So let's get started. Welcome intellectual wanderers and UPSC aspirants. Welcome to our YouTube channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. Today in this lecture number 21, we are going to finally end with Thomas Hobbes as a thinker by doing his last part, that is assessment of Hobbes as a thinker. What is the motive of doing this part, right? So nowadays, as we know that the questions are not directly asked from the concept, but it is basically asked on the various judgment and assessment of particular thinker by the modern thinkers, right? So they are basically asking the question which is very much pertinent to the present context of the medieval or ancient thinkers like Plato, like Aristotle, and etc. So with this, taking this into consideration, there are several modern thinkers like Sabine and etc. who have assessed different thinkers in from different perspective, from different point of view. So let's analyze each of the assessment which is very relevant for UPSC optional, PSIR optional sake. Okay, this will be very pertinent. That's why we are doing the final assessment, right? So the first assessment, which says that Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists. So if you remember the very first part of Thomas Hobbes, in the lecture we have dealt with this particular assessment which says that Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists. But why absolutist? Because at the end we concluded that because of his individualistic approach, because of his utilitarian approach, he started as individualistic but ended as an absolutist, right? With this, we have analyzed this particular assessment that Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists, right? But let's see this particular assessment with more clarity. What can be a different perspective to look after, right? Let's say if this particular statement is given in the optional exam, which says that Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists, and this has been a question as well, if I remember well, in one of the paper, right? So if the question is like Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists, critically analyze, right? So when such questions are asked, we have to critically analyze by giving both pro and against points, right? So as to make our answer look more holistic. So taking this into consideration, I have tried formulating this answer very structurally, right, which will meet all our requirement, right? So let's see what this particular assessment is all about. Okay, so Hobbes as the greatest of all absolutists. So individualism is a philosophy of modern times. Why it is a philosophy of modern times, right? We have to cross questions sometimes in order to understand any concept with clarity. Even this is very much relevant to the questions, right? If let's say certain political thinker is assessing any particular predecessor or any thinker, we have to put a question mark by asking the question, the counter question, why this particular statement is made about Hobbes, why it is said that Hobbes is the greatest of all absolutists. We always have to ask why. You will automatically reach to the answer, because as the greatest thinker, that was Pythagoras, right? He already said that knowledge is inherent. Knowledge is already within us. Knowledge is inherent within us, within our personality. We just have to arrive at the answer by asking right set of questions. So rather than focusing on the question, we have to focus, rather than the focusing on answer, we have to focus on question. What will be the logical question to reach at the answer, to reach at the conclusion? So if anyone follows this particular approach, it will be short method to reach at the conclusion, right? So here it says that individualism is a philosophy of modern times. Why, right? So let's see why they say that the individualism is a philosophy of modern times, right? Because individualism is a byproduct of utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? Why let me give you this particular analogy here. Individualism is a byproduct of utilitarianism. Okay, utilitarian is a byproduct of what? It is basically a byproduct of IR, that is Renaissance, that is age of science, right? So if you will look this analogy from this side, there was a renaissance, because of which there was an age of science. There was a lot of scientific inventions, discovery. There was a lot of scientific buzz which was going on during the post medieval time, right? There was a spurt of industrial revolution. We know what the discovery of steam engine did to the IR, that is industrial revolution, right? A lot of trade and commerce just spurted out in the Europe. There was a lot of flourishing trade, and imperialism and colonialism, which says that exploitation of the colonial nations or colonized nation is also one of the vices of IR, right? So this all led to what? This all led to utilitarianism or individualism. People wanted to acquire, or people wanted to chase power in order to acquire what? In order to satiate their pleasures, right? So hence it is said that individualism is a philosophy of modern times. I'm hoping that you guys are understanding this concept. Why? Because of men being a lot engaged in trade and commerce, there was a lot utilitarianism which was prevailing. Men became more pleasure seeking and power seeking, right? Men always wanted to satiate their pleasure from utility they derived from the various consumption of various products and various goods and services, right? And hence all this led to the notion of individualism, which is a philosophy of modern times. Because in ancient times, if we look at the ancient time or medieval time, it was always a time of feudal or religious superiority, right? Where there was a more emphasis on communism, right? If you will look at Plato, Aristotle, they will emphasize more upon communism, right? But when there was a advent of modern times, when there was advent of industrial revolution, it led to the spurt of trade and commerce. It led to a market economy. If you will read the magnum opus of Adam Smith, right, the Wealth of Nation, basically he emphasizes a laissez-faire economy. Why? Right? Adam Smith, I'm just requesting to take a diversion for topic in order to make the concept sound a little bit more accurate and fair. Okay, he propounded the idea of laissez-faire. What is laissez-faire? It is basically a free market economy, right? Free market economy where there is no government intervention. Why? Because men were more individualistic, because men were more what? Utilitarian. Okay, hence this all is a philosophy of modern times. However, we can trace its root in the thought of sophists. Okay, now again go back to the time of Socrates, right? Socrates' contemporary were the sophists, right? The contemporary of Socrates were sophists, right? When Socrates always gave emphasis to the society, right, where for them they are the societal oriented thinkers who always gave more importance or priority to the society than the individual. Sophists were in contrast. They gave more importance to the individual. They gave more importance to the pleasure. They always articulated the notion that individuals should always chase the power in order to gain the pleasure which he deserves, right? And hence it gave the idea of individualistic approach or idea of individualistic thought can be traced back to sophists, to the time of sophists. What was the time of sophists? The time of the sophist was the ancient Greek, right? So here it is basically challenging this notion that individualism is a philosophy of modern times. Why? If the thought can be traced back to the sophists, then why it is said that it is a idea or thought of his thought which was also, or which can also be traced back to sophist? Because it was prevalent but not in so much prevalence, so as to put it clearly, right? It was prevalent, people were engaged because that was also a time of power, authority. People were also advocating the idea of individualism. But after the age of Renaissance, after the age of IR, the prevalence of individualistic approach proliferated en masse. People started becoming more individualistic because West is a culture of individualism, right? And this all happenings were at the center stage of European Western European countries, right? And this can be seen even to these days, because that is the focal of entire industrial revolution and Renaissance, right? So the thought can be traced back to sophist. According to individualists, self-interest has a priority over the interest of the whole, right? This is the basic idea of sophist. They give more more priority to the self-interest than to the interest of whole. For them, the idea that greatest happiness of the greatest number will not work out, because for them individualism or individual is important than the society, or individual is important than the whole, right? So let's see, there are like how can we categorize individualist. Okay, so even individualistic can be categorized into two types. Okay, what are the two types in which we can categorize individuals? Okay, so the first are methodological individualistic. Okay, so the first are methodological individualists. Who are methodological individualists? So methodological individualists are those who evolve their political theory on individualistic nature of man, right? For example, Hobbes builds his entire magnum opus, that is Leviathan, based on the individualistic nature of man. What is individualistic nature of man? That man is a pleasure seeking, man chase power after power, which seizes only upon one's death, right? That is the individualistic nature upon which the entire edifice of Hobbes, that is Leviathan, is built upon. Or so as to say that entire the theory of Hobbes, that is social contract, which is based on the individualistic nature of man. If he would not have thought the nature of human, right, nature of human during the Puritan revolution, it could not have been formulated the idea of state of nature, right? His hypothesis is his hypothetical situation, right? And hence he could not have been come into the conclusion of social contract, right, which is the basic idea of Hobbes, right? So this is the basic idea behind methodological individualistic. Methodological individualists are the one who derive their entire theory based on the individualistic nature of man, right? Because their method is completely based on individualistic nature of man. Now connect to the Hobbes. What was his approach? What was his methodology? His methodology was resolutive compositive. His methodology was resolutive compositive method, right? He labeled this as a scientific, that as men are part of this universe, and universe is made up of matter and particles. Similarly, men being part of universe, they are also made up of matter and particle. And since the basic physics is that the particles are always in motion, right? Particles are what? Particles are always in motion, and hence because of they being in motion, it creates a sense of pleasure and pain in our brain, right? And hence men always prefer pleasure over pain. Why? Because pain gives them pain. They want pain is a kind of aversion. Being a psychological or Homo sapiens, we always we always tend to chase pleasure, because pleasure gives us happiness. And just in order to accrue or acquire pleasure, man seeks what? Man seeks power, because the resources are limited but demand is unlimited, and hence the more powerful will be able to have more resources, which will give them more happiness. So MP is equal to MR is equal to MH. More power gives more resources can accrue them or give them more happiness. This is the basic logic behind a methodological individualist. Who is the example? Here the Hobbes is the example of methodological individualist. Okay, so this is the basic idea. What are the second type of individualists? They are basically the normative individualists. Who are normative individualists? Normative individualists are those for whom there is nothing wrong in being individualist. Why? Okay, Hobbes is regarded even as the normative individualist. He considers that there is nothing wrong in being individualist. Okay, he is normative individualist because he does not believe that human nature has to be changed, right? So basically there are a lot of group of thinkers who consider normative individualist or normative or individualism as a negative concept, like Plato himself, where he says that society is individual writ large. He always gives more primacy to society, right? They are basically the social, again the social contractualist, or humanism against social contractualist, who gives more emphasis upon the group or the whole. But here normative individualists are contradictory to them or against them, where they don't find it being a negative zone when they propound the idea of being individualist. They say that there is nothing wrong in being individualist, right? They never consider being individualist is wrong. Why? Because men are like that. Men are individualistic, pleasure seeker in nature. And even since Hobbes' entire theory of Leviathan or social contract is built upon the individualistic nature of men, hence Hobbes is also regarded as normative individualist, right? Because there are certain thinkers, like Aristotle, though their methodology is kind of based upon more pragmatic, like individualistic nature of man, coming at the end they kind of suggest more humanism, where they give more primacy to the state or to the society over individual, and hence by coming to the end they kind of deviate to the more social line. But here once when we analyze Hobbes as a thinker, his methodology, that is resolutive compositive method, and his conclusion, that is his contract or social contract theory, where he propounds the idea of an absolute state, right? It is basically on line with his individualistic approach, right? Because he accepts that men are pleasure seeker, men are individualistic, men are utilitarian in nature. Thus, in order to have a stable, harmonious society, he kind of propounds the idea of an absolute Leviathan state, where there is not war of all against all, where life will be more harmonious, where man will not be nasty, poor, brutish, where there will be hope for literature, art, poems, and etc. Right? So there are two kind of individualists. First are the methodological individualists. They basically derive their entire political thought on the basic premise that based on individualistic nature of man. And second are normative individualists. They basically do not consider being individualistic as wrong, because they accept that men are basically individualistic in nature. Men are basically pleasure seeker in nature, right? So they consider it not bad or wrong to be an individualist, and they do not seek any change, that men should be so and so. Like Plato, he always wanted his philosopher king in particular manner, right? But when it comes to normative individualists, they never want to change the individualistic nature of man. Why? Because they never want to. They accept them, and accordingly they derive their theory, whatever best they consider according to the situation, right? So these are the two types of individualist with which we start when it comes to Hobbes as the greatest of all absolutists. So now it might come to your mind that here it is saying that Hobbes as the greatest of all absolutists, right? Here it is clearly written this. But why we are talking about individualist and types of individualism, right? Because somewhere it is relevant, and how it is relevant we are going to see in the further slide. Okay, how this particular topics being individualist and absolutist is relevant we will see in the upcoming slide. But just to remind you, I have already discussed well in depth in the earlier lectures. If you guys have to understand in deep, just go and watch lecture number first, I guess, right? You will have a great clarity in that. Okay, so let's move further. So Hobbes is considered as the greatest of all individualists, as we have already seen in one of the assessment, that why Hobbes is considered as the greatest of all absolutists, because of his theory of Leviathan, where he gives an idea of absolute state, and where he consider himself being a utilitarian in nature. He is considered as the greatest of all individualists because he was the first person to logically establish on the basis of resolutive compositive method. That was his methodology, right? That man is utilitarian by nature, and so man is individualistic by nature. Why man is individualistic in nature? Basically, man is utilitarian by nature. That's why he is individualistic in nature, and hence Hobbes was the first person to establish this notion through his scientific methodology, that is resolutive compositive method, right? He established that since men are more pleasure seekers, men are more power seekers, since men are more utilitarian in nature, they are also individualistic by nature, right? It is as natural fact as earth moves around the sun. Here this is something which needs to be given more musing. Why? Because according to him, his thought was so established that he was kind of giving his theory a credit to the universal law. What is the universal or natural fact? That earth moves around the sun, right? And likewise men are also individualistic in nature, which cannot be changed. We cannot change the circumvention of earth around the sun. Likewise, we cannot change the what? The individualistic nature of, we cannot change the individualistic nature of men, right? This is the testament of what? This is a testament to what? This is a testament of him being normative individualist, right? Why? Because he is relating his idea to the theory or the natural fact that men are individualist in nature, like earth moves around the sun, which cannot be changed. And since the individualistic nature of man cannot be challenged or changed, right? He was the first person to remove the sense of guilt from being selfish. There is nothing wrong or nothing to be guilty about when one is selfish, because human beings are such a way. Human beings are like that, right? Again, this is very much pertinent to his time. He is the child of, Hobbes is a child of his time and place, right? This might not stand correct in today's present situation, but it was kind of very much prevalent during his time. Again, connect back to the time of IR, Industrial Revolution, Renaissance, Age of Science, right? So this is the basic idea. Hobbes is a scholar of capitalist class, right? Now, taking all these things into consideration, one can easily derive the idea that Hobbes is a scholar of capitalist class. Why? Because he is somewhere advocating the idea of capitalist class, right? That man is utilitarian, man is individualistic in nature. His philosophy serves the interest of capitalist class. It is very much explicit in this concept because he legitimizes the capitalist maximization of profit. Why? Because there is nothing wrong or nothing to be guilty about, because men are made individualistic, men are selfish, men are pleasure seeker, and hence there is no wrong in the maximization of profit, right? Why he gave this particular thought, right? Now connect his idea or go back to his time. There was also a sporadic prevalence of whom? the church, right? And church always propounded the idea of usury being wrong, the profit maximization being wrong, right? There was strong sentiments which was attached with the church, right? And hence by establishing his idea, Hobbes is kind of challenging the church, the authority of that time, by legitimizing that the capitalist maximization of profit. He is kind of challenging the authority of church, and hence he is saying that there is nothing to be guilty about in order to maximize one's what profit, because men are selfish, men are individualistic in nature. This is the basic nature of man which cannot be changed. Why? Because again he connects this to a natural fact, that is, as earth moves around the sun, men are also utilitarian. Man revolve around being individualistic, man revolve around pleasures, man revolve around power. And he suggests that there is nothing wrong as everyone is self-centered, right? Okay, so here we are seeing how individualistic he is, how he is giving the priority or supremacy to the self-interest, right? Self-interest, right? So here the term self-interest is very important. Why? Because this is showing his individualistic self-centered approach, right? And he can be considered as the greatest of all individualists, right? How he is challenging the authority, how he is advocating the idea of utilitarianism, how he is advocating the idea against the guilt of being selfish, right? So taking all these things into consideration, it can be considered that the Hobbes is the greatest of all individualists, also because he established the right to life as the absolute right, right? In his theory of social contract, he explicitly mentions that we give all the rights to this commonwealth except one right, that is the absolute right, which is right to life. Here the life is more important for Hobbes. Life of whom? Life of individuals. Why? Because state is not the source of life, only the God is the source of life, right? For him, right to life is the absolute right, for which even individual can kill the other man in order to defend himself, right? And he established that right to life is the absolute right, and man can even kill other man for the purpose of protection of his life. What does this establishes? It basically establishes the idea that Hobbes is the greatest of all individualists. If one is not, then how can one say that even one can kill other man for the purpose of protection of his life? Just think it loud, you will understand the concept. At times scholars find contradictions in his thought, right? What are the contradictions that different thinkers find in Hobbes? So here, according to Macpherson, Hobbes starts as an individualist, concludes as the absolutist. Why? See, we have already seen that there is a general tendency that if someone is individualist, he will never propound or advocate the idea of the absolute state. If I am being an individualist, if I am a pleasure seeker, why will I deem it fit to put restriction on myself by establishing the notion of state, right? Let's take very simple example. Consider the situation in your home, right? Let's say you are very individualist, pleasure seeker in nature. Will you prefer having a restriction over you? Will you prefer this? will you want a control and regulation of your parents, right? Where there will be no independence, no autonomy, right? Why? Right? Will you all deem it necessary? Will you all deem it fit? There is big no. But why Hobbes start as an individualist but concludes as an absolutist? Right? These two are contradiction. Being absolutist and being individualist are two contradictions. This is what Macpherson finds in Hobbes. But let's see the Hobbes answer to this particular contradiction. Right? Let's see the Hobbes answer. What does Hobbes has to say? Hobbes himself being the greatest of all absolute individualists, why does he tries to establish the idea of him being a greatest of all absolutist as well? Okay. Also has to say Hobbes in individualist in his assumption, but absolutist in his conclusion. Right? Some kind of similar to this particular statement that Hobbes start as being individualist but ends as being absolutist, right? So according to Sevine, absolutism is derivation of his individualism, right? So this is a answer. So this is the answer of the contradiction that Macpherson finds by Sevine. Right? So according to Sevine, Hobbes' absolutism is derivative of his individualism. Because Hobbes was individualistic, so he was absolutist. Let's see how and why. It is for the protection of individual and his right to life. Hobbes create absolute state. Right? Why? So if you guys have seen the earlier lecture, you guys will understand it very crystal clearly. But you guys, if not have watched the earlier lecture, you will not be able to understand it. So if not, please go and watch the previous lecture. Either lecture number part 3rd or part 4th of Hobbes. Here you will understand this particular line in very detail, which is very important or the central focal point when it comes to Hobbes. Because he was individualistic in approach, so was he absolutist. His absolutism is derivation of his individualism. Let's discuss it very briefly. Okay. So Sevine here says that it is for protection of individual and his right to life. Right. All this while we are discussing that Hobbes was the greatest of all individualists. And the main reason for him being individualistic is that he gives more primacy or supremacy to his right to life. For him, his right to life is very important. Now again go back to the time of Puritan Revolution. Right? Let's go back to the time of Puritan Revolution. There was bloodshed all around. Right? There was chaos. The situation was very chaotic. There was huge threat to life. There was no protection of property. Right? So this was all the state of war of all against all. Right? This was a state of war of all against all. Why? What was the reason for this? The reason for this was men are individualistic, pleasure seeker in nature. Right? They are fighting to acquire power so that they can acquire resources. Right? This was the state of nature where there was no security to a right to life or his property. Right? There was no authority to regulate or control, and hence men or the Hobbes He basically talk to the man or talks to the people, or he advocate an idea that men should come together with a mutual agreement or social contract to form a Leviathan, a supreme absolute state, right, which will have control over the passions of all men, because men are pleasure seekers in nature. He was normative individualist, and which cannot be changed. Hence, he creates an absolute state, right? That's why here the idea which says that Hobbes start as an individualist and concludes as absolute and absolutist of and the answer which was given by Sabine, that absolutism is derivation of individualism, is the response here, right? Because of he being individualistic in nature, for whom the right to life was the supreme right, he concludes his entire theory being an absolutist, establishing a supreme absolute state, that is Leviathan. Even when he creates absolute state, he gives individual right to resist the state in case state deprives him from right to life, right? So here the notion of right to life is very important. Despite him being creating an absolute state that was Leviathan, he still gives right to life a supreme authority, a supreme priority. Why? In case if state tries to arbitrarily deprive one from his right to life, the man or the people can resist the state. This is establishing the idea that Hobbes is the greatest of all individualists, and hence he is also the greatest of all absolutists. This is the response to the Macpherson contradiction, that is Hobbes starts as an individualist but concludes as an absolutist, right? So this is the basic idea or the critical assessment of this particular statement, which says that Hobbes is the greatest of all all absolutist. All right, so let's see the next critical assessment. Okay, so what does Professor Vaughan says? So Professor Vaughan is basically calling that Leviathan is the useless as a book of history and fruitless as the book of politics. Okay, he is basically saying that Leviathan is the useless as a book of history. It is useless as a book of history and fruitless as a book of politics. Why? So let's see. Hobbes is one of the most criticized scholars, as we have seen. He has been criticized differently from the different thinkers. Someone criticizes Hobbes for his limited perspective. He was described as a devil, right? Leviathan was described as a book containing lewd principles. Okay, it is considered as a book containing lewd principle and poisonous tadpoles. Why? Right? His book was among the prohibited books by the church. Here is the answer. His book was challenging the supreme authority of his time. Can you guys guess which was the supreme institution? It was the none other than church, which basically advocated more religious, more humanist, more spiritual notion of man, in contrast to which Leviathan was basically talking about more individualistic nature of man, that there is nothing wrong in being individualist, right? And hence it was kind of challenging the authority of the church, which was supreme, right? And because of which his book has been severely criticized by the church as well. His book was among the prohibited books by the church and even bonfired twice during his time. His book, that was Leviathan, was bonfired or burned during his life. It was critically rebuked by the people, by the church, by the people who were strongly connected sentimentally with the church. It was hugely rebuked and criticized. Vaughan was contemporary. Who was Professor Vaughan? So basically Vaughan was contemporary of Hobbes and critic of Hobbes as well. According to Vaughan, Leviathan is a useful book. Why? Useless book, sorry, my bad. Right? Leviathan is a useless book. It neither tells why it is a useless book. Here is the answer. Neither tells the reliable account of origin of state. According to Professor Vaughan, Leviathan do not tell the reliable account of origin of state. Which state? His Leviathan state. How his Leviathan begins. He do not tells the reliable account of origin of state. Leviathan is also a fruitless book to understand the politics. Why? Because of his limited, confined perspective during his time, where he propounded the idea of state of nature, which was hypothetical, which did not exist in history, anytime in history, according to criticism, according to various critics. And hence his entire political theory is also not useful. Why? Because his entire premise is built upon his concept of state of nature, based on nature of human beings, which did not exist. Then how will someone apply this particular absolute state? Right? And hence Professor Vaughan says that Leviathan is also a fruitless book to understand the politics. Right? Because it was not credible, it was not based on the true events, the history was even not relevant. But our rationale says that it is wrong to criticize Hobbes. Why? Why it is wrong to criticize Hobbes? Let's see the response. Right? We have seen these are the perspective of the various critics, like Professor Vaughan. Right? But according to balance the theory, it is also important to give our perspective, right, to make any answer look more holistic, more complete, right? So here we can balance the critic by saying that it is not entirely wrong, it is not entirely right to criticize Hobbes. Why? Let's see. So Hobbes' purpose was not to tell the history of origin of the state. His purpose was not to tell the history of what? History of origin of state. His purpose was to tell why we should obey state and how our life will be without state. So Professor Vaughan is criticizing or labeling Leviathan as useless and fruitless book for history and politics. Why? Because he did not propound or talk about the idea of origin of state. And now we are putting our perspective that no, it is not entirely correct to criticize Hobbes based on the lines which was propounded or given by Professor Vaughan. Because his purpose was not to tell the history of the origin of state. Right? Now go back to again his situation of Puritan revolution. Right? His basic purpose was not to establish a complete new state. His basic problem was this particular revolution, which was kind of state of nature, where man was always engaged in war. It was war of all against all, and hence he proposed his idea of Leviathan state, where he gave the reason why we should obey state and how our life will be without state. Right? So it is not basically entirely right to criticize Hobbes according to the line which was given by Professor Vaughan, because here the purpose are completely different. His purpose was not to tell the history of the origin of the state. His purpose was basically to tell why one should obey the state and how our life will be without state or in absence of state. Right? Hobbes is not an anthropologist to give the scientific account of origin of the state. He is not an anthropologist who are usually assigned with the job of giving a history or origin or the theory of origin of state. Right? He was a political thinker. He was a political ideologue. Based on his particular prevalent situation, he gave his idea of particular kind of politics or political theory. That's why it is not justified to criticize Hobbes. Hobbes is one of the most important scholars to understand the principles of modern political life. Leviathan is not only a masterpiece in English literature, it is also a masterpiece in political theory, especially in IR, right? Because in international arena, the state of nature still exists where there is no supreme authority to regulate the countries, to regulate the autonomous state. If you will connect his theory of social contract, it is kind of based on the Bretton Woods conference, which gave rise to the independent institution like UN. And hence it is not entirely justified to criticize Hobbes on the line which was given by Professor Morgan. Karl Marx, who is regarded as one of the greatest philosophers, has acknowledged Hobbes as a father of all of us. Why? Because he considered the basic nature of man as being individualist, as being utilitarian. Right? And hence we will do Karl Marx in detail, where his theory will also be kind of based on the lines of the similar lines. And hence he regards Hobbes as the greatest philosopher. He acknowledged Hobbes as the greatest of all of us. All of us? Who are all of us? Here are basically the political ideologues or philosophers, or thinkers in more modern parlance. He venerated Hobbes as the father of all of us. Right? So this was all about Professor Vaughan assessment, which says that Leviathan is the useless as a book of history and fruitless as a book of politics. Now let's see the last assessment, which says that while John Borda was standing on the gate of modernity, it was Hobbes who jumped inside the gate. Right? So this particular statement is based on his concept of sovereignty. Okay, we have already seen his idea of sovereignty, right? Even Borda tried to give his concept of sovereignty, and Hobbes as well gave his concept of sovereignty. But there was something lacking, I will say, in the Borda concept, which did not allow Borda to walk into the realm of modernity. There was something which we will see, which was addressed by Hobbes, and hence he is considered as the first modern thinker, political thinker. And now this particular statement that while Borda was standing on the gate of modernity, it was Hobbes who jumped inside the gate will make more sense. Here inside the gate is what? The gate of modernity. Right? Who is to be treated as the first modern thinker remains contested, because there are three in the line, and all the three are considered to be the modern thinker. We will see who the three are. Since modern political life revolves around the modern nation state, and the most distinctive aspect of the modern nation state is a theory of sovereignty, right? All the three thinkers who are in the contest, they all propounded the idea of sovereignty, right? So we will see what was their peculiar idea of sovereignty. The thinker who has given the first complete theory of sovereignty of state deserves to be known as first modern thinker. Okay, so we will analyze the theory of sovereignty of all of the three contestants. Okay, and who are they? We will see in the next slide. So the contestant who will give the first complete theory of sovereignty have the right to be called or venerated as the first modern thinker. Okay, so this is the factor, this is the particular term which we are accepting to consider or venerate someone as a first modern thinker, right? So what is the factor or term? He should be the first one to give the complete political theory of sovereignty, or complete theory of the sovereignty, right? So now we will see whose theory on sovereignty was complete. In order to see whose theory was complete, we have to find what was the lagging as well in each one of their theory. If we find any lagging, then it will be cancelled out. No, that particular thinker cannot be considered as someone who has given the complete theory of sovereignty. Why? Because there is a lagging, there is a lacuna, and the one who has matched the terms or the matched the conditions will be regarded as the someone who has given the complete theory of sovereignty, and hence he will be venerated as the first modern thinker. This is our condition. There should be a certain terms and condition, right, to consider anyone as the first modern thinker, and hence in the statement itself it is said that Hobbes was one who inside the gate of modernity. We have to understand what is our term or what is the conditions to regard anyone as the first modern thinker, right? Because he is the first who jumped inside the gate of modernity. Here the idea is implicit that he is kind of father of modernity, because he is someone who is giving the modern idea of sovereignty. He is giving complete theory of sovereignty, right? So now in this particular thing we have addressed that what is our condition that someone can be venerated as the first modern thinker, and our particular condition is that someone can be considered as the first modern thinker if he has given the first complete theory of sovereignty. How many contestants are there? There are total 3 contestants, and who are they? We will see here. Okay, so there are 3 major contestants. The first is Machiavelli, who is also called as father of political realism, right? Let's see. Some scholars regard Machiavelli as the first modern thinker because he gave more realistic approach to his theory, right? In his magnum opus, that is the Prince, where a prince should be clever like a fox and brave like a lion. So some venerate Machiavelli as the first modern thinker because he was the first person to give the concept of nation state, right? However, Machiavelli, though established the primacy of nation, has not given any systematic view on sovereignty, right? So what is the lacking here? What is the gap here, right? Though many thinkers consider him as the first to propound the idea of nation state, he cannot be considered as the father of modern thinker. Why? Because he did not give any systematic view on sovereignty, right? He did not talk about a particular state. He built a basic premise that there should be a nation state. But he did not talk about a kind of nation state or sovereignty. He was talking about a systematic view on sovereignty. He only talked about the traits or characteristics of the prince, where he gave his 11 principles in his magnum opus, that is the Prince. Prince would be clever like fox and brave like lion. Right? But he did not give any systematic view on sovereignty. That's why Machiavelli is rejected to be regarded as the father of modern thinker. The second in the line is John Boda. Boda was the first person to give the theory of sovereignty of the state. He was the first person, even before Hobbes, to give the theory a talk particularly about the sovereignty of the state. He defined sovereignty as the supreme power of the state over the citizens and subjects. He also propounded the idea of supreme power of state over citizens and subjects. Despite him giving the concept of sovereignty as the supreme power of state over citizens and subject, what is the gap or lacking here? What is the lacuna here? However, Boda theory is partial. Why it is partial? As it gives sovereignty to the state only in secular matter. As far as matter of religion is concerned, church is the supreme. Though he talks about the supreme power of the state over citizens and subjects, it is only related to the matters which are secular in nature, right? Because when it comes to religious sphere, he only considers church to be the supreme power. Why? Because it is related to God, and according to him, the kings are the yoke of God. The kings are the offspring of gods. The kings are the subject of God, right? Despite him giving the supreme idea of the state over citizens and subjects, his idea of sovereignty is only limited to secular matter. When it comes to religious matters, he always gave church the supreme authority. That kings and princes shall always bow down before the court. This was his idea of sovereignty, and hence his theory of sovereignty cannot be considered as the complete theory of sovereignty, and hence Boda is also out of the contest. Boda is also, so we have already rejected the two. The third in the line is Hobbes. Let's see what is unique about his idea. It was Hobbes who gave the first complete explanation of sovereignty, right? He held that even church is under the state, where he propounded the idea that even the spiritual and temporal lords should bow down before the sovereign lord, that is Leviathan, right? And hence he is the first to give the complete explanation of the sovereignty, that is his absolute state, that was Leviathan. It is for this reason his book was prohibited by church, right? It was challenging the authority of the church. He was subdominating the institution of church. Since Hobbes has given the complete systematic logical explanation of the theory of sovereignty, he deserves to be called as the first modern thinker, right? He gave complete systematic logical explanation, right? Why systematic logical explanation? Because the causes which he talked about, state of nature, social contract, it was very logical in nature, it was very logical in explanation, and hence his theory of absolute supreme or absolute state or sovereign state can be considered or can be deserved to be called as the first modern thinker, a first complete idea on sovereignty, and henceforth he can be called as the first modern thinker. And we can say that Boda was standing at the gate of modernity. He could not come out of the medieval mentality, that is the supremacy of the church. He could not come out of the medieval mentality because the church was holding him back. He still considered church as the supreme, right? But it was Hobbes who gave the complete explanation, logical, systematic explanation. No, that there should be a sovereign absolute state, that is Leviathan, in front of whom even the spiritual lords, that is church, and temporal lords, that is feudal lords, shall bow down. And hence it is right to suggest that Hobbes jumped inside the gate of modernity, and hence we can call Hobbes as the first modern thinker, right? So with this, you guys can check your progress by answering this 4 questions. The first question is state of nature, state of war, comment, 10 marks. The second question is individualism is inherent in Hobbes' absolutist ideology, comment. Okay, this is last year question. We have just seen in this assessment that Hobbes as the greatest of all absolutists. So why? Because of him being individualist, he also concluded himself as the absolutist. So taking that into consideration, you can answer this particular question holistically. The third question is Hobbes as the greatest of all absolutists. We have directly seen this particular assessment, so you can answer this question accordingly. So the fourth question is, while Boda was standing on the gate of modernity, it was Hobbes who jumped inside it, comment, 15 marks. Okay, We have also seen this question very holistically. So you can answer this question, and also I have posted some of the questions in previous lecture. You can all answer these questions and send me directly to this mail handle. I will for sure evaluate them and come back with valuable feedback. Okay, so with this, thank you so much guys for sitting till the very end and showing all your loves. I have been receiving constant feedbacks, right? I have been receiving constant mails and comments through the mails, right, which gives me immense satisfaction to keep giving my 100% in order to keep make you guys successful in the most prestigious aspirations that you guys are aspiring for, that is to become a civil servant, that is an IAS, right? So this is my small contribution for the society, to educate people, to illuminate the minds, the young minds, right? So thank you so much for continuing with me, and also ensure to show your love by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Geek by Energy. And I ensure you, if you guys sustain with me through this tough, difficult journey, the result will be very, very beautiful, with utmost happiness, that one can with firm determination say that yes, I did it. Okay, so let's end it here for today. We will again meet in tomorrow's lecture. Thank you so much.